Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Well, sometimes an eclipse or something like that, the stars line up just perfectly. And here I am in the company of Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma ji. We normally do our hangouts on Zoom, but today we are going to do it in person. So Pandit ji, welcome to PGurus channel.
Pranam ji and namaskar to everybody. It is an extremely fortunate confluence that you and I are both passing through New Delhi at the same time.
Yes.
How wonderful that is. So why not take advantage and let's just sync everything and bring everyone up to speed.
Absolutely. And I think we had left it at the aftermath of the British elections, where the Conservatives came back with a thumping 80-seat majority. And since then, a lot of things have been happening. I think about 4 weeks now since we had a hangout. And Satish Sharma ji, what do you see happening in the government? Is get Brexit done, of course, is their number one priority. But around that, what else is happening?
I think many things have happened which people didn't really expect. And most of them are actually quite good. We had gotten into that morass in the UK of believing that around a table you needed to have conflicting views to get anything done. Whereas traditionally the idea was you'd have leaders, each with their own particular and specific agenda and orientation and ambition, and they could have been diametrically opposite, it doesn't matter. But the electorate would then say, we actually prefer that vision. And when an electorate chooses a vision, it's that vision which should dominate. But we had lost that, and now that we've got Boris with an 80 majority, the nation has clearly said, we want you to pursue this agenda that you have told us about. And so what we've suddenly got is a very focused, a very harmonious, a very consistent, almost a very unified team who are now working on delivering a project. And it's quite refreshing to have a decision being made and actually being passed in Parliament. As you know, the Brexit Bill was placed before Parliament last week, and it just cleared without a whimper.
Oh, wow.
You know, something which over 3.5 years had been sort of bounced back and forth and had really, there's a famous expression, an oozlum bird which flies around in ever-decreasing circles until it disappears. And it was that sort of sentiment that was in Parliament, but now it's disappeared. And the novelty of having legislation just go through without huge resistance and never-ending committees is something which is really quite refreshing.
Yes.
So that's an unexpected happening. People are becoming used to the idea that it's possible for things to move forward quickly and smoothly. So there is a great opportunity. On the other side, more interestingly though, is the developments of what's happening with the Labour Party. Prior to the election, there was almost like a unified voice in the Labour movement saying that Jeremy Corbyn and his rather extreme left ideologues and the grouping, that they had the right vision. And so the party was united behind it. Post-election, suddenly everybody is talking about how terrible things were before the election, how it should never have been done, and how everybody knew that it was not going to be a successful campaign, and yet they were all silent before it. So it's like the knives have come out, it's the Ides of March. You can almost sense whisperings going on in the corridors and behind Roman columns. We're just waiting for the last few blows to be delivered. So the Labour Party is actually the more interesting scenario. One thing is worryingly still apparent, and that is that they have not recognised the degree to which the British public rejected the vision that had been put forward. So even at this moment in time, there are contenders for the new Labour crown who are actually firmly from Jeremy Corbyn's camp and the rather left extremist perspective, who are in complete denial. They haven't yet realised that the reason that they failed so spectacularly was not just the Jeremy Corbyn factor, but it was also the approach of, we're going to renationalise the utilities, we're going to renationalise the railway. And even if those things are desirable, you can't do them in the manner in which Jeremy Corbyn's team had laid out their stall. And I think the other thing people rejected was that there is the majority of humanity in most countries tend to be moderate, straightforward, hard-working, conscientious, decent people without extreme views. And Jeremy Corbyn's party seemed to have become aligned with the extreme element in all of the various countries, wherever he had connections and wherever there was an international connection. And the country rejected that as well. So that's something they're going to have to deal with. But there is everything to play for. The contenders are from the far left, who are still Corbynistas, and then we have some much more moderate voices coming in. Who's going to win and who should win the leadership of the Labour Party are two different questions.
Is there a timeline when Labour is going to choose its next leader?
Well, the mood within the party seems to be, it couldn't be soon enough. They are desperate for this change to occur and this transition to occur. And there's also a level of mistrust that the manner in which, the very dictatorial manner in which John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn have led the team, that's to be rejected. So the mechanisms for selecting the new leader, the feeling is those mechanisms must be created and operated by people other than Jeremy Corbyn's little team. So at the moment I think it's going to take until April, which is another 3.5 months away. So there is an awful lot of instability, but it couldn't be soon enough. The contenders are all quite amusing in their own way. They all have their slight peculiarities, shall we say.
So they officially put their hat in the ring, saying that I'm running for the president of the party.
The leader of the Labour Party, yes.
And here's my vision. And
that's all started, and they're all completely differing personalities, totally different visions, and it's almost as though we've got people who are from multiple parties, all within the same party. The visions and the personalities are so different. It's a broad sweep, so they'll have lots of opportunities to choose.
Wonderful. So, in your opinion, who do you think is going to win the nomination for the Labour leadership?
So that's the million-dollar question, really, isn't it? So let's view it from 2 points of view. In terms of the way politics normally works, the people who are already very, very well established in the party, who have held ministerial posts, etc., etc., all of those are vying for the pole position. But their difficulty is that they're all tarnished by being so closely supportive of and associated with Jeremy Corbyn's campaign.
Essentially, they've gone radioactive.
So they are pretty toxic and with varying degrees of toxicity.
Sorry, guys, I don't know you, but that's politics.
Absolutely. But if you listen to somebody like Emily Thornberry, who on paper has a wonderful profile, but she is saying so much now, which in the public's eyes is completely contrary to what she was saying only a month ago. And so that's a big problem, because I think people generally have gotten to the point where they are not really too interested in the policies and the detail of what's being said. Their mistrust is so much that they think it would be much better to get a completely new, inexperienced person of integrity. So the movement seems to be that the public is choosing in most elections these days people who they think, okay, they're not perfect, but at least we can trust them to say it the way it is and consistently say it. So from that point of view, personally, I think the person who should lead is probably Lisa Nandy. She was always very, very cautious about the extreme left and what their policies were and the manner in which the party was being run. So she was on the periphery of most of the activities. But she certainly connects with her constituency, and much of what she says has sense, consistency, integrity, and it's genuine. So I think she will connect with the electorate much, much more than the established shadow front bench. On the shadow front bench there are other candidates, but do you really want an education minister who has not been successful herself in terms of acquiring an education? How do you stand and propose that, yes, people should do lots of A-levels and should go to university? When it came to your turn, you made decisions which were completely contrary. 2 grade E A-level passes, or whatever it was that Jeremy Corbyn did, didn't really inspire a lot of confidence within the educational establishment that, yes, this guy knows what the value of education is. So all of those things, I think, the public are going to take into account, and I think the voting members of the Labour Party should choose Lisa Nandy. And I think she's an outsider as far as the bookies are concerned. But if not this time, certainly at some time in the future, she's a great candidate for being a prospective leader of the Labour Party.
Yes.
And we could do with more Punjabis or persons who have some Punjabi or Indian origin.
Of course,
in positions of influence.
Of course. They are what I call as they are the soul of the party.
Yeah. Yeah,
this is literally and figuratively saying it.
completely they are. And I think that's coming across now.
Yes.
So I would probably toss in my support with Lisa Nandy.
Great.
She would be a great addition and hopefully would help to resurrect what seems to be a dying movement at the moment.
I mean, again, viewers, we always want a two-party system, a thriving two-party system for democracy. Yeah. And we really can't say, place more emphasis on this. We really have to have that. Of all the political systems, democracy is the least flawed.
Yeah.
And
somebody once said that democracy is absolutely terrible, but there is no better alternative.
Yes.
And as long as human beings are the flawed creatures that we are, and the dynamic tension that exists between opposites, it gives us a centrist position. So we desperately need the Labour Party to get its act together.
Right.
And more than anything else, from an Indian point of view, we need a person to lead the Labour Party who can repair the harm that was done by Jeremy Corbyn's group, not only to the domestic British Indian population, but the international Indian diaspora. He alienated the old party of the Indian of Indian choice so far. That damage was virtually irreparable. So we need somebody who can also say, I can speak to that, and utilise some of the advantages that hopefully an Indo-British relationship will bring.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. So, to the reason for your visit to India, you just concluded Dharma Rising 2020 yesterday at the Vigyan Bhavan as part of Global Hindu Federation. I'm sorry I missed that event. I had my own book release event to do, and a certain chief minister of a certain state had already committed to it.
And congratulations on that. I've been noting the figures on Kindle, I think, and you're doing very well. So
yes, indeed. Thank you.
Hopefully a bestseller in the offing there.
Yeah. So if you're lucky, you can have it on the bestseller list for 1 or 2 days. I've been able to do it for 7-8 days now, but every day I'm like, is this going to be my last day? It's going to be our number one.
Yeah.
But I'll take it. I mean, I can still claim number one bestseller because it was there for 7-8 days. Even 1 minute, I'll take it.
I think you're going to be surprised that the sentiments that you've captured, they're actually shared by a lot more people than we generally tend to know.
That's right. That's right.
The majority tend to be quiet, and they tend to be monitoring what's going on. But when something comes along which allows them to express themselves and say, yes, that's what I'm feeling, that's what I'm thinking, and I think your book touches that space. So, so all power to your book.
Thank you. So about Dharma Rising 2020. So why don't you share with our viewers what are your ideas, because you're trying to do this globally, and you've taken upon a fairly significant and momentous task, if you will. And what are your ideas? What's your vision? What kind of help can our viewers do, being in whichever part of the world they are?
Wonderful, thank you. Well, here in New Delhi seemed to be the best place to kick off Dharma Rising 2020. We had hoped that Dr. Swami would be able to join us, but he seemed to be happier supporting your book launch than our event.
His too.
His too. But no, we appreciate the work that he has to do, and are grateful for whatever time he can give to us. But Dharma Rising started 3 years ago when Dr. Swami visited us in the UK. So the first Dharma Rising event was actually with Dr. Swami as our chief guest. And we launched the notion that Adharma had risen to such a degree now that the natural sequence of events would be that Dharma would start to rise. Dharma is like the immune system of the body. It stays inactive until the body is afflicted to such a degree that it then needs to wake up and dust itself down. And I think that's a really apt description of the way our Hindu community is. Pretty passive until we absolutely need to do something to set things right. So Dharma Rising 2020, since we launched it and started it, and Global Hindu Federation has taken it on board, we have had events, I think, in 26 cities. And so the Dharma Rising conferences have been in places such as Cochin, Kuala Lumpur, and then Kashmir is planned for August, and It's been in Nepal as well, in Kathmandu. So it's doing a lot of really good work in outreaching and connecting with passive, quiescent Hindu networks,
Yes.
and trying to share the same issues that all of them face, and to create a mechanism for connecting those people.
Right. I mean, I'm piqued by your choice of words, passive and quiescent. I think Dharma Rising requires you to get out of that state.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please continue.
And so we'd decided to hold this one in New Delhi to kick off the 2020 season. I think 2020 and 2021, in years to come, people will look back and recognise them as being pivotal years. In our tradition, we have this notion of a sandhya, you know, sandhi, and it's when the moment when tides turn, when something is moving in one direction and then suddenly it changes into the next. It's a moment of transition, and the yugas have a similar sort of transition, and I think this is the time that we're in. So we decided to do it here in New Delhi, and we were graced with the Honourable Union Minister Praful Patel, Prahlad Patel ji, who presided, and very grateful for his support for this issue. He's a wonderful chap, and Manoj Tiwari ji he also joined us, as well as a few other dignitaries and members of Rajya Sabha. And we had delegates from 16 countries, and we had speakers from half a dozen countries as well. It was wonderful to have them all present there. And the best part of it is that we had a very young cohort who also joined in, and that's a significant part of what we're trying to do. Is they have the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, and many of them don't yet know how that picture is coming together. And so when you have a group of international Hindus who are all working on putting that picture together, we can accelerate their understanding, both of where they are, where they've come from, and what they need to do next. So it was a wonderful event, very, very staunchly and strongly supported by the Delhi group of Global Hindu Federation, led by our Shri Ravi Barwarji and his team. And so, yes, it was an excellent way to kick things off. Now the next one I think is probably scheduled to be in August, and the invitation has been extended by the Kashmiri Pandits group, who said we will put everything together and come and hold it in Srinagar.
Great.
So, you know, we're looking forward to that.
Wonderful.
You know, on that, we all know that in the outside world, a lot of noise is made about how terrible things are in Kashmir and in Srinagar, and yet within India, it's all settled down to normalcy. And you know, we see videos of the high street and people bustling around doing their normal shopping, etc. So the hype and the reality are diametrically apart. And we're hoping by holding it in Srinagar, we can also take that image and message back out into the outer world and say, okay, chaps, calm down. Enough of the propaganda.
So Satishji, you know, this 370, more or less the entire international community has accepted this is an internal matter of India, and it's sort of being put to rest, more or less. And yet, when this Citizenship Amendment Act became law, there have been a whole slew of protests. And what is really shocking to me is that these are being held in what I would call as cranially filled institutions such as Oxford and Yale. And
not to forget JNU.
Not to forget JNU, of course. They
no matter how much we would like to forget JNU.
They would feel insulted if they are being excluded. But this, you know, is it just that as a student they don't have the reality of life hitting them in the face, and therefore they think that this is the David that they need to support without really understanding the implications of the CAA? What are your thoughts? I mean, Oxford and Yale, I would think that even among 100, one or two would start thinking, let me read this act. It's only 13 pages, and it only talks very specifically to some people of a certain ethnic minority. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, so much to talk about on that. And firstly, as you say, 370 is universally and internationally recognised as being India's internal affair, and that what India did, it was perfectly entitled to do. And secondly, it's internationally recognised as having been a piece of legislation which improved human rights throughout that region without attention or priority to any particular religion. So it's religion neutral, and what it has done is elevated the human rights of every individual in Kashmir and brought them into alignment with the rest of India's population. So It's beyond a reproach. It can't be criticised as having been a terrible piece of legislation. But outside of India, you're right to say that yes, it caused such a furore, and we saw it on the streets of London. We talked about it in our last broadcast. 370 was the first. The CAA will be the second, and then what we will see is NRC, it will be the same, and when the Uniform Civil Code is spoken about, it will be the same. And there is a reason behind this. You're right to bring in the students. Now, it might seem a little bit old-fashioned, but in my day, there were students and there were grown-ups. Now, what the grown-ups were is they were the people who were mature enough, who had navigated relationships, who had taken on the responsibility of bringing up children and were contributing to society. They were mature human beings.
Right.
Now, the reason students are called students is they're to study because they know very little. They have passion, but to be perfectly honest, they have very little life experience. Many of them are still coping with acne and hormonal adjustments and everything else.
Right.
And so, even though they may be opinionated, and even though they may be articulate, then that doesn't equate to being informed, it doesn't equate to being educated. And it doesn't
equate... I seem to have heard this phrase before, but please continue.
I'm really enjoying this phrase. In fact, many people are commenting on the usability of opinionated and articulate, but not educated. So we should repeat it as a mantra, especially in the presence of students. But the thing with students is that we know that they're passionate, but they're also the most gullible. They're also the most prone to being radicalized. It's a commonly accepted issue.
Yes.
And so the presence of a very vocal student body is a good thing, so long as it doesn't become toxic to the fabric of the institutions where they are learning about political activism.
Right.
But what we've seen at JNU, it exceeds all of those boundaries.
Right.
I mean, were there to be student riots of that sort in the US, I'm sure within a few days we'd be seeing those same students in handcuffs and ankle shackles, in orange clothing, dragged in front of a court.
Right.
And yet, here in JNU, it's almost as though they've become holy cows, that no matter what a student does, the title of student activist is something that can be worn as a badge of honour. And it's complete nonsense. You know, I'm sure in years to come, when they see the YouTube videos of how foolish they were in those years, it's not going to cause them to reflect and say, oh yes, we did wonderful work. You know,
unfortunately, some of them never graduate. That's a different problem.
You're absolutely
don't be
right.
that part. Don't be part of that group.
The 40-year-old undergraduate at JNU.
Yes.
No, it's again, it's part of that transition. JNU, once upon a time, and in many of the faculties which are nothing to do with politics, had an excellent reputation.
Yes, and they continue to do that.
And they continue to do that. It's just this one vocal faculty who seem to have lost all sense of rhyme and reason. And the faculty themselves, the lecturers, they really are culpable. They are harming the futures of those students who have entrusted their well-being and their education to this group of faculty members. So I would hold them culpable. And as I say, let's all remember that students are children. They have a lot to learn yet, and we should be tolerant. But tough love is also appropriate.
Yes.
And it's time that grown-ups decided to exercise their paternal and maternal responsibilities.
Right. Moving on, one topic that I think is going to start appearing more and more mainstream is the real history of India. As we are, I've been part of a series of debates on NewsX where with every excavation you unearth something new, and fortunately for India and Bharat, everything is actually cast in stone.
Yes.
That's one of the phrases they use, when you're trying to be flexible with the law. But here the history is cast in stone.
Yes.
And I know some experts who can read off these 400, 500, 1,000-year-old scripts. I mean, just like you would read a newspaper, and I'm just amazed because the script is not exactly the same. It changed over time. But long story short, as this comes up, how do you see Britain trying to, adjust to the fact that perhaps in order to be able to rule, we have to keep in mind 40,000 people were controlling 23 crores, which is 230 million people.
Yes.
And that was a combined population from Attak to Katak. I like to use that line too.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So with this changed reality now, where history is suggesting that what was written and read by you and I when we went to school isn't quite the truth.
Yes, in fact, it's wonderful you mentioned that, because that was part of one of the themes that came up at our Global Hindu Federation Dharma Rising conference. The process of decolonization that's going on. Now, here in India, everybody is lifting layer by layer the layers of deceit that had been imprinted into the Indian consciousness and into the Indian history. And as each revelation of what really happened becomes public knowledge, there is a sense of trauma and a sense of pain and a sense of injustice, which I can almost feel perceptibly beginning to rise. So when Nilesh Oak ji publishes all of the evidence which says that the Mahabharata occurred 12,775 BC, i.e. almost 15,000 years ago, and it's irrefutable evidence, all of a sudden our timeline changes. And when we look at the comparative history of Europe, some 14,000 years ago, there's an emptiness there. And so we have got this immensely long timeline for our civilization. And that flies in the face of all of the European Indologists and their historical records of who we were as Indians and what India was. So this is going to occur even at a faster pace. Now, if we can find wise people in Britain, and that's not so easy to find, because remember, Britain is an island, tucked away on the edge of the continent of Europe in a fairly cold part of the Atlantic. And so there is a natural tendency for an island race to become little island mentality. And so things that are global in perspective, or civilizations that span millennia, are very difficult for a little islander mentality to accommodate. And yet it's necessary for Britain to understand its own positioning and its own lack of ability to understand what's happening in India. Now, if there are wiser people in Britain who can positively and proactively engage themselves with the process whereby India is standing up in its own light and being confident and comfortable, if that process can be positively arranged and organized so that engagement occurs, then it could be wonderful for both parties. I often say that Germany recognized its Holocaust. And in doing so, and in repairing or attempting to repair the harm that had been done, it was readmitted and accepted as a full member of the international family of civilized nations. Now, Britain has never done that. And it's a huge task that lies ahead of Britain, but I think it's inescapable. You know, our philosophy of Dharma teaches us that as you sow, so shall you reap. And so a wiser person, a mature person with a genuine desire to serve the population today of Britain would be wanting to engage with this issue, meeting it head on, and then finding partners to help them to traverse this, this chasm. What we don't want is for Britain to fall into that chasm and for an awful lot of very innocent British citizens to suffer as a result of the foolishness or lack of comprehension of a small group of leaders. So there is a very big issue in front of Britain. Now that Brexit seems to be back on track, there are opportunities there. We have, in India, we have a country where just the infrastructure needs to be updated, and there are contracts aplenty which could support both India's evolution and development and Britain's economic necessity. So the pieces are in place. We desperately need to find wise heads who are capable of navigating those pieces with a conscientious desire for the benefit of both parties. We're going to try and either find those people or help create those people. I think that's going to be the key issue in front of Britain, certainly over the next quarter of a century.
Yes, indeed, and I think the British are wise. They've chosen the right party for this era, the 2020 generation now, and we'll wait and see how things play out. But Satish ji, as always, a pleasure having you and meeting you in person. I think 2 years now. I think we had one in a January in London, if I remember correctly.
That was the first one, yes. And that was also in a hotel room, if I recall.
Yes, indeed.
We're celebrating an anniversary.
Yes.
No, it's been a pleasure. The last 2 years,
yes.
Such a lot has happened. And I like to think that we've had a small impact.
Yes, absolutely.
On some of those
Right.
changes, a nudge here and a
Right.
gentle little push there.
Right, right.
And it's made a remarkable impact. And I think it's probably also worth thanking your viewers who
Yes,
have added
absolutely.
their voices to some of the ideas we wanted to get out there.
Right.
So
right.
we're all part of this journey, and gratitude is due. So namaskar and pranam, and thank you very much for your support.
And do subscribe to our channel. We are closing in on 60,000 mark.
Awesome.
We could be moving faster, but I'm not complaining. But I'd love to see us hit the 250,000 mark, and that's a good benchmark to have, where I can then use that to invite even more people of gravitas. Satish ji always has a spot on our channel. It's
thank you so much.
How much we can adjust our timings to get it right. So thank you very much, Satish ji.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.